So one of my main fixations at this time is a neat little game called Lost Sword: Tales of Britannia. Usually I build up to why I like this game and then get into the negatives, but for this video it makes more sense for me to reverse that order. Lost Sword is a very basic gacha game. It's an idle RPG that requires minimal effort on your part. You spend a good portion of your time building up your characters, grinding for equipment, enhancing account-wide items, and crafting. After that, you send your teams off to battle. Even though team composition and positioning are important, and you can personally control when units use their ultimates, it's mostly just a stat sheet going against another stat sheet. Your average party level is important because there's a level difference penalty mechanic, so you will eventually get to a point where you can't do anything. This is also a game where dupes are extremely important for your team. The stat bonuses you get for dupes is extremely large, which can allow you to fight with a really large level penalty. But moving away from the mechanics for a moment, let's talk about the artwork and presentation. I've heard more than a couple of times that this looks like a Flash game. I don't know where people get that idea from, since the only Flash games I played was all the trash on Newgrounds back in the day. So all I can really say is, if this looks like a Flash game, then I like the way it looks. But I know when people say that, it's meant to be an insult, so okay, I guess? But if you want an actually good comparison, look no further than Brown Dust 2. They're both pining for the same well-cultured audience. And while I do enjoy the presentation of Lost Sword, Brown Dust 2 is just the clear winner across the board. The only thing Lost Sword has over Brown Dust 2 is the combat models are not chibies. And I had to admit, these days there's really no reason to ever have chibies in your gacha games. Phones are just way powerful to handle anything substantial now. But I really mean it when I say that's the only thing Lost Sword has over Brown Dust 2. When it comes to the overall look of the game. Next, I'll talk about the music and the voice work. The music is really not anything to write home about. For me, personally, I had to spend some time with it to have it really grow on me. In fact, I'm using background music right now for the game, just so you have a little taste of it. Even then, I'm not entirely sold on it, which I feel is a problem since this is a bona fide idle game. I gotta tell you, the game is instantly better with some Final Fantasy music. But the bigger problem here is the voice acting. For reference, my preferred language is English, but if that is unavailable, then I pick Japanese for Chinese or Japanese games, and I pick Korean for Korean games. It's weird, I know, but that's how my brain works. So for example, I played Brown Dust 2 in Korean, and I played Ghost Frontline 2 in Japanese. Lost Sword is a Korean game, but it surprisingly has English voice acting available, even though the global version isn't out yet. But English is not good. It just really feels like the actors were given very little to work with. Maybe they were just given some lines and a brief description and the directors were cool with just the one take. I don't know, but it definitely lacks the personality that you would sense in the other high budget games. But more importantly, voice work is just straight up missing. The latest patch is never voiced in English, let alone having translations. And some characters haven't had an English voice for a long time. There's also no voice work whatsoever in the main story, while it is fully voiced in Korean. It will probably be added when the global version comes out, maybe? But surprisingly, when I swap to Korean, it doesn't sound great either. It's a really weird conundrum, but I think it just comes down to the audio editing. The game overall just sounds a little rough to listen to. Though I will say the lobby music is pretty catchy. The last negative I'll talk about is with the main character, Ethan. I don't know about anyone else, but this has to be the most generic looking motherfucker I've ever seen in my goddamn life. And his personality is super generic on top of that. And it also doesn't help that he is portrayed as a Mary Sue. I don't use that term lightly, and I'll have more to say about that when I touch on the story. But even his name is generic. Ethan? Really? How in the hell did they settle with this design? So I decided to look into the developer of this game. which is Code Cat Incorporated. Looking into their history, there's only one other game to their name, which is called Sword Master Story. And looking at it, it looks a lot like Lost Sword. So it's pretty easy to tell where the inspiration came from. And it adds credence as to why I just really like this game as a whole, even if it may not make sense on the surface. First, allow me to get personal for a moment. I just really love the Arthurian legend, despite being a sci-fi nerd. Anything King Arthur related is just an instant W for me. I just love what the legend represents, and Lost Sword is just a really silly take on that legend. Yet somehow the story manages to take itself seriously, despite the idea that the would-be King Arthur is just a big booba princess who lived in a pampered life and almost got goblin slayed when she first ventured out on her own. This is a huge reason why Ethan was summoned to this world through isekai, because the main heroine wouldn't last 2 seconds without guidance. But she isn't the only one who was altered. Morgana, also known as Morgan Le Fay, goes from being a goddess with a massive influence on the story to being an idiotic child because for some unknown reason, she had to go through a rebirth. No one even recognizes her. So now she has no influence to the story whatsoever. Bedivere, known for being Arthur's most loyal knight, is now Elizabeth's ditzy best friend who is hopelessly optimistic of her. Gawain, a knight most known for either being the greatest knight ever or the worst knight ever, had to stand against her family who sided with the Empire, which makes her go directly against the code of knighthood, which is like his entire thing. And my personal favorite, Lancelot. Lancelot is probably just as famous as King Arthur himself, known as being as the NTR Knight. In Lost Sword, Lancelot was driven out of her kingdom by an invading country. She took up the sword to take up vengeance against the invading emperor, and after 10 long years of training, she actually succeeded. But after that, she no longer felt any purpose in life, so she was advised by a friend to find a lover, and that friend taught her the ways of romance. Problem is, this friend never had a lover, and her reference was adult novels. So in totality, Lancelot is a righteous person who got baited into thinking hentai is normal romance. This is all ridiculous, but these twisted personalities all come from somewhere. They have an origin point, which makes them fit to the character. It's that feeling where everyone is so different but familiar at the same time. And it's all played so straight. Yeah, we know Bedivere is clumsy and not a symbol of a knight, but if you tell that to her face, you're actually going to make her cry, and Elizabeth will literally fight you, because it's not about the skill, it's about the undying trust between them. This makes the game ooze with personality. And the thing is, all these alterations also allow characters that are unique to Lost Sword have their own chance to shine. There's even this whole thing about discovering Magitech, and suddenly we have a Duchess who wields a BFG. Maybe this is Final Fantasy. But I mentioned this before, so let me mention it again. This is an isekai story. Ethan is a person from the real world who got chosen by Truck-kun to be in a different world. Now, usually in isekai stories, the main character is special in some way, or they have some ridiculous ability that cheats the entire premise of the world itself. Ethan falls in the former category, since he's a chosen one archetype. He is the sword bringer, and if you haven't already figured it out, that is an entirely made up thing that isn't from the Arthurian legends. That said, Ethan's role is pretty well defined. He has to find Excalibur and give it to Elizabeth, the King Arthur of this world, so she can defeat Vortigern. Good premise. This isn't a bad thing at all, but the problem is in its execution. Aside from just traveling with Elizabeth, there really hasn't been any hints regarding to how to get Excalibur, let alone being able to track any progress for it. So what the story has been doing instead is just showing how awesome Ethan is. Now, this isn't completely unwarranted. When he was isekai'd, he was summoned by Merlin. and then trained by her, and yes, Merlin is the woman in this game, feel free to pull out your surprise Pikachu emotes. It's not like a certain other game hasn't done this before, but thanks to that training, Ethan is not only a skilled sword fighter, but he also has a strong tactical mind. Since Elizabeth did not get this training, it makes sense as to why Ethan takes the leading role. But since that is the case, it leads to Ethan kind of just doing everything because his whole party are bumbling idiots, and it gets to the point where all three of them just fully rely on him to solve everything. In fact, it gets to the point where the story outright admits that Ethan is more famous than Elizabeth herself. I feel like this is not a direction they should have taken, because it makes Ethan look like a Mary Sue, and to be real with you, he is a Mary Sue for about the first 20 chapters. And by that point, he has 3 extremely powerful relics, and stopped a war pretty much through his own planning. It's only after that point the writers decided he needed some competition, and he suddenly starts getting his ass handed to him by characters stronger than him. Since the comparison is so obvious, this is basically a role reversal of Artoria and Shiro from Fate Stay Night. Artoria was the extremely competent one, even when she was heavily nerfed by how shit Shiro's mana capacity is. This did not mean Shiro was weak. For all intents and purposes, he's just a human going up against godlike beings. But the power gap between the two was very clear. What made that dynamic work is the powerful sense of martyr syndrome, and their shared trauma of doing whatever it takes to protect people, especially each other, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. This caused so much drama between them, while also serving as a powerful motivator to get stronger. By comparison, the dynamic between Ethan and Elizabeth is heavily muted. I'm on chapter 31, and while Ethan is a well-developed character, Elizabeth is lacking in comparison. She does feel bad that she isn't leading the group herself, but she also has just accepted that Ethan is way better at this than she is, and there's no sort of open turmoil regarding this. In fact, she's much more concerned about how Guinevere wants to bone him. So, you know, typical harem stuff. There's currently 45 chapters in the main story, so maybe something happens later on, but Elizabeth is the main heroine of this game. So the lack of development is plain to see, and I do think it hurts the story. But I like it anyway. I don't know. I think the setup just kind of works. I would have had a much different opinion if Ethan didn't eventually get his shit kicked in. But since he did, I'm willing to see the first 20 chapters as setup for the eventual hardships. Like I said, the premise is comedic, but the story itself is taken pretty seriously. It's not grim-dark or anything like that, but there are stakes involved, and there's even nuance between the opposing sides. There is potential in the story that can be brought out. And just in case people think I'm expecting too much, Lost Sword's very first YouTube video is a lore trailer, and there's a lore channel on their Discord where the community manager posts about background information and the history of the kingdoms in Britannia. That is way more work put into this than about 90% of gacha games out there. So I think I'm warranted to have some expectations. This game has been out for 5 months in Korea, so there's plenty of time for them to elevate their storytelling. The gameplay itself is a standard idle RPG experience, but standard doesn't mean bad by any stretch. It just means other aspects of the game had to elevate it. So I guess that goes into the game's main selling point, which is the depth animations. Not gonna lie, this isn't doing anything for me. I'm too busy thinking about how my team just died. What does catch me are the ultimate animations and the skill card artwork. They look pretty good. Pushing at lower deficits do require knowledge of the game too. Not much knowledge, but it's there. It's a difference between getting walled 5 levels below the recommended stage or getting walled 30 levels below the recommended stage. So yeah, I like the gameplay. It's better than the other idle RPGs I played, and no, I do not consider Nikkei an idle RPG. I do not care about your opinion on that. Now, let me be real with you for a moment. The greatest strength that Lost Sword has is how low maintenance it is. This is not a gacha game that is meant to be the main game you play for like 20 hours a week. At least not actively. You can literally put your phone in sleep mode and the game will still play in the background. This is a side game. And honestly, this is why idle RPGs still have a place in today's market. The competition is steep right now. There's so many games coming out that competing is pretty much a lost cause for the majority of companies. And this is probably CodeCat's best move to make a name for themselves. Overall, the game is like the artwork. It's generic, but it's peak generic. I just really like this game for whatever reason. Maybe it's a guilty pleasure type of thing, or maybe there is just some potential that I see in it, and I feel like this game could be worth my time. And honestly, it could be worth your time as well. There is so little maintenance that you have to do that it really doesn't hurt to just try it out and see if you like it or not. And if you do like it, this is just one of those games where you can play on the side while you're playing your Genshin Impact or your Wuthering Waves or whatever else. Now, of course, I will say I am extremely biased. After all, I'm a sucker for anything King Arthur related. But this is just my thoughts. I really should not be objective when it comes to reviews and recommending things. I should just tell you from the heart. And this is one of those games where I say, hey, I would like to have more eyes on this game so that it can get more reception and there is more traction, and then maybe, just maybe, more of the game's potential can show up more. Now, this game is coming out in July. I believe it's July 11th. But the Korean version is already out, and basically almost everything is translated to English already. So it is up to you if you want to jump in right now and play the Korean version, or if you want to wait for global. So I do hope you guys get this game a try, but if not, then hopefully you were entertained.